We saw a very personal side of President Obama earlier this week when he announced a new initiative aimed at addressing the unique obstacles to success that young black and brown men face. As the president pointed out, young men and women of color are systematically and structurally blocked from the tools, the resources, and opportunities to make good choices for their lives and succeed. Now, the statistics are staggering. 2/3 of students who can't read proficiently by the end of 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare. More than 70% of America's inmates can't read above a 4th grade level. Nearly 85% of juveniles who face trial in the juvenile court system are functionally illiterate. 75% of Americans who receive food stamps perform at the lowest 2 levels of literacy, and 90% of high school dropouts are on welfare. So the correlation could not be clearer. Now, the president's initiative, called My Brother's Keeper, includes business leaders, government, faith, and community leaders, and a $200 million pledge from philanthropic organizations who'll work over the next 5 years to identify effective programs and models that address issues ranging from early child development to education, parenting, and economic challenges. The goal is then to replicate those programs across the country. Now, some critics are saying it doesn't go far enough or do nearly enough. Others are criticizing the president for not doing more earlier in his presidency. But what struck me is perhaps the most important thing President Obama did was to publicly challenge the idea that the status quo for young men of color is acceptable.
We just assume this is an inevitable part of American life instead of the outrage that it is. It's like a cultural backdrop for us in movies and television. We just assume, of course, it's going to be like that.
Here to talk more about the president's initiative and the issues faced by communities of color are the president of Morehouse College, Dr. John Silvanus Wilson, the president of Spelman College, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, as well as Sirius XM Radio's Joe Madison. Hello, my distinguished panel.
Well, thank you.
How are you?
Good morning.
So, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Tatum, I want to start with you and get your reaction to the president's announcement.
Well, I thought it was a great announcement. The president was correct in saying that something ought to be done about it and needs to be taken more seriously. I believe that Morehouse College, it's pretty much true, Morehouse College has been doing something about this issue for a very long time. He is now focused on minority males, African-American males in particular, and by involving the private philanthropic community, I think it's going to be a win-win. The $200 million, by the way, is just a start.
Dr. Tatum, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I also would agree that it's great that President Obama is using himself as a role model and as an example to inspire the nation to pay attention to the plight of young black men. It is important, however, to point out that young black women are not doing much better.
Right.
The gap between black girls' dropout rate and the dropout rate for black men is only a 10% difference. So I think we have to continue to think about this in a comprehensive way, thinking about how we are addressing the needs of young people of color across the board, men and women.
You know, Joe, one of the things that struck me was that, you know, we were talking, the president was speaking, I think, very specifically to a certain demographic of young brown and black boys. But as Jamel Bowie of the Daily Beast pointed out, neither Jordan Davis or Trayvon Martin were low income, and both actually had active fathers. So as much as we talk about, you know, some of the things that are in the president's proposal, one of the things I didn't hear this time from the president, I should say, because he's talked about it before, is the idea of sort of confronting and addressing our biases and other factors that create this environment, this toxic and dangerous environment for young boys of color.
Well, and I think in a way he did address it when he, in that last clip you had, where he said, you know, that we have, and these are my words, low expectation, and it's become the norm. We see it in our culture. We see it in our music. We see it in the movies. It becomes the norm, and it can't become the norm. You know, as I look at the two distinguished presidents of two of the most distinguished universities in America, I think about when I was growing up, it was Morehouse men, Spelman women that taught high school, that in fact taught us, that challenged me to be more because they had higher expectation. And I think one of the most comprehensive things we can do, and I say that because of the two guests that you have, is that we have to recognize in our community that education and look at the two graphics you had earlier. Education is the new currency of the 21st century.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be black or white, Republican or Democrat, poor or rich. It's really going to be those who have education and trade, and
right.
those who don't have education. And I think we have to have an educated community.
And Dr. Wilson, to that point, I wanted to ask you, I mean, what are you seeing? I mean, we hear statistics all the time about young men and women, frankly, starting college, not quite frankly prepared for college. And I'm wondering what you're seeing at Morehouse with the students that you have coming in.
Oh, I don't think it's unique to Morehouse. I think we see the lag nationwide. African-American males in particular start with smaller vocabularies at kindergarten entry. 86% of them, and this was a big stat in the president's announcement, 86% of African-American males are reading below proficiency levels by the time they enter fourth grade, and they're at the highest risk of low academic performance. So then it's no surprise that 1 in 3 African-American males today can expect to go to prison in their lifetime.
Right.
That is shocking.
You know,
okay? And we can do something about that.
You know, Dr. Tatum, one of the things that you and I have talked about before are sort of the historical, systemic causes that impact the opportunity these kids have today. And I want to read something that Jamel Bowie also wrote for Daily Beast and get your reaction. He said, after all, that's how we got here. If these young men are coming from neighborhoods that are poor, segregated, and violent, it's because for most of the 20th century, it was the policy of the United States to make them that way. For half a century, we siphoned wealth from black families. We denied them loans, closed them off in housing projects, redlined their neighborhoods, and left them to fester. If they saw any investment, it was in police, not to help the residents, but to keep them in their place. I wanted to get your reaction.
Well, I think it's an accurate statement. I think it is an accurate statement when we look at the policies just as were outlined, whether it was redlining or disinvestment in public education in neighborhoods dominated by black and brown youth, whether it is even today the investment that we are not making in the young people who are ready for college. I know that one of my major concerns, and I know Dr. Wilson shares this, is that we have kids who've done everything they're supposed to do. They come to school ready to be successful in college and yet have to drop out because they don't have access to the funds they need. So there's a real challenge, and I think that's a particularly important point. I just want to say this in the context of the president's new initiative, because when you have the young people who have been successful and who have made it to college but then come home in defeat and debt because they haven't been able to complete their degrees, they then become a model of disincentive for their younger brothers and sisters who see, you know, my big brother, my big sister tried and was not successful in being able to complete. So even as we look at ways to intervene in a much earlier stage for kids to make sure they are on the right track and having the support and mentoring they need, we also really need to invest in those students who are in college today trying to complete their educations and will return to those communities as role models if they can be successful.
You know, Joe, final question to you. Not surprising, the president is getting criticism from the left and the right. You know, obviously on the left, some are saying it's too little, too late. He should have done it early. I mean, you've seen some of the, and some actually acknowledge this is an important first step, but not nearly enough. And then, of course, on the right, there is the criticism that this is nothing but, you know, government-sponsored discrimination. We saw that in a piece by Roger Clegg in the National Review. But it strikes me there's nothing the president could do on this issue that is more important than speak out on it that was going to satisfy anybody.
Well, Roger Craig doesn't live in my neighborhood, so, you know, if I just discount that. But let me first point out something. It is, you know, people on the left think it's all public policy. People on the right think it's all personal responsibility. It's both. If you have public policy to build a school, then you have personal responsibility to make sure those children go to school to learn. It's a combination of both, and I think the president talked about that. But the reality is that we have to understand that this is about the salvation of our demographics. And as far as it's too little too late. Look, I don't care when you come to the party, as long as you come there ready to do what has to be done. And before people start criticizing what the president did, hasn't done, when he did it, when he didn't do it, look yourself in the mirror and ask, what are you doing? What are you going to do about it?
Absolutely. That is a great place to leave this. I wish we had more time, but we will come back to this subject. And thank you so much for your time, John Silvanus Wilson, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, and Joe Madison.